It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. Appreciate you riding along with us for today. If you're catching us live on our streaming website, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Always good to see new faces there. Well, I see a ton of you out there this morning. You know, I got a question the other day from a listener who said, well, how is it you can see what cities people are in? Well, for the record, folks, there's no magic here, and I don't have the NSA spying capabilities. Basically, your internet provider, when you get an IP address assigned to your modem, it recognizes the city you're from. So I can sit here and I can look at a map and I can see that Afton is watching, Huntington, Fort Walton Beach, Baltimore, and a few others. So basically, there's no magic here. These are basic analytics that are capable for any website. As you know, I build websites for a living, and so it's a basic tool that I use. There's no magic there, and I can't tell who you are. I can only see what city you're in. So, and I can see folks as they join us, as they come on board. So anyway, for the record, thanks for joining us on our live streaming website. For the record, by the way, before we get too far down the road today, I was invited yesterday by a brand new group out there that's built a website that's kind of a competitor to Facebook. It's called Patriot FB. That's Patriot FB, like as in Facebook. I would encourage you to go over there and participate with them for a couple of reasons. One, we are going to start streaming our live show there every day. So one of the hosts over there, a fellow by the name of Jeff Norton, who runs the Midnight Patriot, will be streaming our live program there every day going forward. And not only will you have an opportunity to hear America's Voice Now on that as a streaming show, but you'll also see other shows out there as well. So the upshot is that's a good thing. I encourage you, and of course this is run by Patriots, and I know Jeff. He's got a very, very strong background in security and things like that. So if you participate in that website, you will not be open to some of the monitoring that's done by all of the NSA groups and so forth and so on. So anyway, we're going to touch on a couple of different things today. One, our topics today are going to be the constitutional sheriff's fight against gun tyranny. Now, we're going to talk about two different aspects of that. One, there was a lawsuit recently filed by a group of sheriffs, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the sheriffs and what they're doing to help fight back against the tyranny of gun control in these states like Colorado and New York, where they have passed these unconstitutional measures prohibiting you from having access to firearms or building databases on you that are, unconstitutional and illegal. The second issue is, our second topic is NSA court rulings. What does it all mean? You know, there was a ruling that came out yesterday, and the issue of that particular ruling was that the court came out and stated that what the NSA is currently doing is a violation of the Fourth Amendment in reference to your phone records being monitored and all the metadata and that kind of thing. So the upshot of that is actually a very, very good thing in the sense that this has a long way to go in the courts yet, and we're going to look at and explore what some of those issues mean. But there is a second court ruling that is due also on the Fourth Amendment and the NSA, and the plaintiff there is different. But then that judge has kind of given some indications that, again, he also finds that to be problematic. Our third topic is going to be in reference to the plaintiff in this first NSA case. It appears that, and according to his statement, there is a serious problem in the sense that he's made a stunning revelation. His email account after he filed this lawsuit and his text messaging suddenly began sending messages that he didn't create. And his comment is, quite frankly, real simple. He's just stating simply that the goal here of the NSA was to let him know, the government just wanted me to know they are watching me, quote unquote. I find that very disturbing in the sense that, you know, for those people who are out there and have the mentality that, well, I don't do anything wrong, so what does this matter to me? I strongly encourage you to read this article, because the concept is, if you can sit there and create an email in someone's account and send it out, and that individual is not responsible for it, you can pretty much set anybody up to make it look like they've done or said or are engaged in anything. And if you put that past our NSA, God bless you for being a more naive and trusting soul than I am. Our fourth and final subject this morning will be pharma tyrants. You know, GlaxoSmithKline came out and made an announcement yesterday that they are going to stop paying doctors to promote drugs. Well, gee whiz, that's a conflict of interest that's been a battle for a very long time. That's actually good news for America. The part of it that they don't tell you in these articles, and this is an article in the New York Times, is that, and they kind of allude to it, but they never really get down to the crux of it. The reason they're doing this is because there's a new clause in Obamacare that requires that they publish for public dissemination all the information about what doctors they're paying and how much. So the truth is, rather than get caught with their hand in the cookie jar and their pants down, they're just going to stop paying the doctors. So for those of you who have a bias, you know, in mind that says, oh, nothing good can come out of Obamacare, I encourage you to use your critical thinking skills and check that bias at the door. I want you to read this article. We'll talk a little bit about it. And at the end of the day, you'll understand that while, you know, Obamacare has got is far outweighed by the negatives, there are one or two good things that have come out of it. And so we'll talk a little bit about those. Let's get into our first topic this morning, which is the sheriff's refusal to enforce laws on gun control. You know, there was a group of sheriffs out in Colorado. Colorado was the latest state to pass these massive new regulations relating to gun control. And there were a group of 62 sheriffs out of a total of 69 who joined in this lawsuit. So only 7 refused to participate. And these sheriffs filed a lawsuit that says that the law is too vague and it violates the Second Amendment. And furthermore, that from their perspective, you know, law enforcement would be a very, very low priority relating to gun issues because their constituencies aren't really interested in that. Now, the truth is that these are sheriffs who are actually following the Constitution and not the laws of men. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a good thing. Anytime sheriffs are willing to stand up and refuse to engage in abuse and tyranny, that's a good thing. The real question here is there are 3,000 counties in the United States of America, which means there's roughly 3,000 sheriffs. The truth of the matter is that I've got to imagine that, and according to the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, which is run by Sheriff Richard Mack, excellent organization, by the way. Their website is cspoa.org. I encourage you to go there and learn more about it. There are links, by the way, on our Facebook and our website, and I'll have links in the body of this YouTube video as well. But the idea here of 437 sheriffs who are standing up for constitutionally delineated freedoms and liberties begs the question of, what about the other 2,563? Where are they? Well, they're in various states, God only knows, but some of them are stepping up to the plate. Some of them are completely asleep. And, you know, in a lot of states, sheriffs have been basically eviscerated. The sheriff's office has been eviscerated and their authority and power has been reduced. What this should tell you is that this is a vindication of those who have fought to keep sheriffs independent of state appointments and or the elimination of sheriff's departments that is being attempted in many states, including here in my home state of Missouri. They essentially tried to block and eliminate the sheriff's office and put put it up underneath the state police so that the state police would appoint a sheriff county by county by county rather than an elected sheriff. We defeated that a number of times now. And I'm glad we have, because to be honest with you, the sheriff is the last line of defense for most Americans. And a lot of folks don't realize it, but the sheriff is the highest law enforcement officer in any county. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that we're giving those sheriffs a mandate. Now, what I'm suggesting here is that what I want you to do is I want you to work with me to make sure that your sheriff in your county is, one, aware and awake to what the CSPOA does, two, that you're supporting them if they are a constitutional sheriff, and that you are educating them if they're not, and encouraging them to participate and learn about what their duties and rights and responsibilities are under their the ruling of their position as a sheriff. So it's our responsibility to give these sheriffs a mandate, right? And I want you to let your sheriff know if he or she is. Now, there's a link on our website and Facebook page, and I'll put it in this body here of this video, about the sheriff's associations who have actually signed on to make a statement that they are going to be constitutional and that they will support and defend your constitutional right to the Second Amendment. And that's on the CSPOA.org. It's CSPOA.org/sheriffs-gun-rights. And there'll be a link there. But here's my point. The sheriffs who are listed here are those who are supporting it. And there's a state-by-state breakout. So you can look in your state and see if your county sheriff has signed this petition and signed the link and agreed to be a fair and reasonable representative of you when it comes to constitutional rights of your Second Amendment. The other website that they offer is the Redcoat list. This is a list of sheriffs who have denounced the CSPOA letter and said, stop sending me this garbage. Now, what I want you to do is if your sheriff is not on list A, like a Chinese menu, I want you to go over and look at list B and find out if your sheriff's on there. And then I want you to go to your sheriff in writing and in person, and I want you to start working with your sheriffs locally to educate them and make them aware of the importance of their duty and their obligation to protect and defend your county against federal and state and tyrannical overreach, regardless of what agency it comes from. The truth of the matter is, we're seeing a wholesale onslaught against gun rights. And it's important that we end this before it gets too much further down the road. Now, just to bring this into stark contrast, this year, coming up in 2014, a new law is going into effect in California. I always refer to it as California. And if you live in California and you love your state, I get it. But I got to tell you, the concept of how California operates is so far from the reality of what the Constitution says. There is no other state that has more innocuous and liberal progressive mentality and enforcement of unconstitutional mandates than California. And, there's that old adage that as goes California, so goes the country. Well, with all due respect, we don't want most of what California is doing throughout the rest of the country. Here in the Midwest, we decry it. Now, this new law goes into effect, and it's going to create a state database on all firearms sold, not just handguns. Prior to this, it was only handguns. Now it's going to be any firearm at all. Long gun, short gun, makes no difference. And here's the problem. One, there are federal regulations that bar the federal government from building a database. Now, let's not delude ourselves into thinking that if the NSA is willing to listen into our phone calls, that they're not also building a database. They are. But the truth of the matter is that there are prohibitions against it. And yet California is going out there and putting these prohibitions in place, or these registration regulations in place that will actually force you and force a dealer to register your gun purchases with the state. Now, there's a couple of real problems with that. There's a guy named Dittmer who was interviewed for this particular article, and it's in SAC B, which I guess is the Sacramento Bee. And he states in there, it won't affect me personally because I do abide by all the laws. Well, I got to tell you, Mr. Dittmer, and I appreciate what you're trying to say there, but I think the concern that I have with that kind of a statement is that I don't consider it to be I don't laud the attribute that I'm a solid, loyal, tax-paying citizen. Because to me, that's anathema to liberty and freedom. You see, your rights and your rights under the Constitution and your rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of your happiness exceed the rules and the regulations that are placed upon you by tyrants. And to sit and say that, well, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I'm not saying I go out and break the law, and I'm not suggesting that you do. What I'm saying to you is that civil disobedience has been the precursor of every great mass change in all of history. Civil disobedience on a massive scale, peaceful civil disobedience, is the one thing that has changed everything that has been changed. I mean, look at the civil rights movement. Look at the suffrage movement, right? Massive involvement in civil disobedience were the factors that brought these changes to bear. I mean, you've been hearing all this nonsense about Mandela and how he's been, he's the savior of South Africa. Well, let me tell you something. What Mandela was perhaps the most well-known for was his civil disobedience. I mean, the guy spent 27 years in jail. Now, look, I'm no supporter of Mandela. I believe, and I think it stands to reason, and if anyone does their research on it, you'll find that Mandela was an open, blatant communist. But apartheid was wrong, irrespective of what his political ideology was. Apartheid was wrong. So the way that they ended apartheid, and it wasn't just the communists, and it wasn't just Mandela, it was everyone. They used civil disobedience as a methodology to defeat that. And so, sitting there and holding up your law-paying or law-abiding taxpayer card, I think is a mistake. Now, the truth is, this law in California is sending tremors throughout their state. And it should, because the truth of the matter is, anytime you see registration of firearms implemented, it is always followed by confiscation. And California right now and New York are the two states that are the most vociferous about this. They are using any and every opportunity to seize firearms from individuals. They're going back and looking at mental health records of everybody. They're going back and looking at criminal records of everybody, and then they're matching those against databases they're building. Ladies and gentlemen, that may only be the earliest, use of these registration laws. But mark my words, it will not be the last. And what you don't realize is that, it always starts like this, where they say, well, and people will look at this and say, well, okay, so maybe the guy who's mentally ill shouldn't have a gun. But what you don't realize is that they start out with those people that society ordinarily says, well, maybe they shouldn't have a gun. The criminal. Well, with all due respect, you can be a criminal and a nonviolent person and be completely, totally capable of owning a firearm. You all know my story. I am a felon. I cannot own a firearm. And yet, I am a nonviolent person. I've never had any kind of criminal activity in my life prior to my felony. And frankly, my felony was a setup. And thirdly, I've had no trouble with the law since that instance. So, and I've never been a violent person. I mean, I've been involved in a couple of fisticuff things as a young fella, but the truth is that, let's be honest, I'm not the kind of guy who goes out and robs stores and beats up old ladies and plays, right hook to the guy walking across the street or whatever that game is they're playing now, knockout. That's not who I am. So why am I prohibited from owning a firearm? Why is somebody who in their 20s or their late teens who got caught with, an ounce of weed back in 1985 barred here in 2013 from owning a firearm when they have completely changed their life? They've got a job and a wife and a house and kids, and they've got and they pay their taxes, and they participate and contribute to society. They've got a great job. and that person is barred from owning a firearm. Not to mention the fact that so is everyone in his household. You see, the idea of felony and barring a felon means that it's not just the felon who's barred, it's everyone in that felon's household. Because when that felon is labeled that way, no one in the household can own a firearm because he cannot be in proximity of a firearm in his premise. That's the law. So it doesn't just bar me from owning a firearm. It bars my wife. It bars my children. No one can own a firearm and still live in the same house as me. And ladies and gentlemen, that is an abuse of their Second Amendment right, even if you believe that mine should be barred. So for those people who stand on the law and order argument, I would argue that there are plenty of reasons why. I'm not against saying that a guy who's robbed a bank with a gun should never be allowed to own a gun again. But I am saying that there are many, many, many more nonviolent felons out there who really should not be prohibited. And there are many people out there who have a mental health history that are being prohibited and or having their guns seized in places like California and New York that shouldn't be. Because someone went through a divorce or a death in their family and sought mental help. Help does not necessarily mean that person should be precluded from owning a firearm. I mean, there are many instances in our lives when we may go through a depressing period where we go seek mental health. And the truth of the matter is, when you sit there and say that by seeking mental health, you, with foreknowledge, are barring yourself from ever owning a firearm, it's going to have the opposite effect. People who truthfully do need the help will avoid seeking it because they don't want their Second Amendment rights prohibited. And so I find this whole thing to be frankly, the opposite, have the opposite effect of what it should. You know, and the people who are out here supporting this thing are really have the whole wrong attitude. You know, this guy says, well, it's not our intent to take guns away from law-abiding citizens. I'm trying to keep my officers from being shot. Listen, with all due respect, let's be honest. That's not a real risk here. And you are trying to take them away from law-abiding citizens. The truth is, everybody knows, and the evidence is empirical. Taking guns away from law-abiding citizens does not prohibit illegal use of guns. People who are going to use them illegally are going to get them anyway, and they're not going to abide by the laws, and they're not going to abide by whether or not I should register or I should fill out a form for the ATF to check my background. If they're a criminal, they're not going to worry about that. That's the simple truth, folks. And any use of gun registration laws is merely a methodology of figuring out how they can get guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens so that we cannot defend our nation against tyranny. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Ride with us. Tomorrow morning, we're going to start streaming live on Patriot FB. Today, we're not because we're working on the technical issues. But tomorrow morning, we are going to start streaming live on Patriot FB. I encourage you to go there and register, patriotfb.com. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. And we'll be back in just a moment. Stick with us. This should be an interesting show. Our next segment is going to be these NSA court rulings and what does it all mean?